The establishment of the Catholic Church and its mission in the Philippines. The establishment of San Agustin Church. In 1571, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi assigned 21,212 square meters of land in the southwestern parts of the city to the Augustinian missionaries. In the same year, the Augustinian fathers built the first church and convent made out of bamboo and nipa. However, it did not last long because of fire. By the year 1599, through the leadership of Bishop Agurto, the establishment of the actual church began. The building of the church was finished in 1606. The establishment of the Manila Cathedral. Miguel Lopez de Legazpi assigned a piece of land where the Church of the Our Lady of the Immaculate under the patronage of the La Purísima Inmaculada Concepcion was established. It was made of wood, bamboo, and nipa. The arrival of the Augustinians. The Augustinians were the founders and first apostles of the Catholic faith in the Philippines. Led by navigator and Augustinian friar Andres de Urdaneta, a Spanish fleet was sent by the King of Spain to the Philippines together with 5 other Augustinian friars in Mexico. The Augustinian friars were the first Catholic missionaries in the Philippines. On April 28, 1565, they arrived in Cebu together with the alentado Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. The first 5 friars were Fray Andres de Urdaneta, OSA, Fray Martin de Reada, OSA, Fray Diego de Herrera, OSA, Fray Andres de Aguirre, OSA, and Fray Pedro de Gamboa, OSA. For 13 long years, the Augustinians were the only friars in the country until the arrival of others in 1578. During this time, they served as chaplains to the Spanish fleet and continued their apostolic work, most especially to the newly baptized natives. It was also at this time that the friars built the first monastery and church in the Philippines, which was made of light materials. This church housed the image of the Holy Child, Señor Santo Niño de Cebu, that was recovered by a Spanish soldier in a burning house. This image is believed to be the same image given by Magellan to Queen Juana during her baptism 44 years earlier on April 14, 1521. Rada in Cebu. Martin de Rada, OSA, remained at Cebu from 1565 to 1572. He is thus considered the apostle of the Christian faith in Cebu. He also made voyages to adjacent islands, mainly Panay, in the years 1566 to 1567 and preached there also. In 1572, he became the regional superior of the Order of St. Augustine in the Philippines. At the time that the Augustinian province of the Holy Name of Jesus was founded in the Philippines on March 7, 1575, he was its first prior provincial. In the monastery of San Agustin in Intramuros, de Rada organized the first center for study and missionary cooperation in the Philippines. He formalized the study of local languages and helped in the preparation of grammar books. He gave motivation to the teaching of the sciences and humanities, and in the monasteries developed the teaching of religion, music, arts, and science. He also left behind him a written legacy of the beginnings of the Christian evangelization in the Philippines. When previously in Cebu, he had begun to study the Chinese language, such that in 1574 he was acting as an interpreter to a group of Chinese merchants who visited Manila. On June 26, 1575, he and Jeronimo Marin OSA accompanied a delegation of officials to China. Martin de Rada OSA is much remembered as a great defender of the Filipino people against the lack of justice of Spanish officials at the local level. In an environment where it was difficult to keep the focus on the catechism appropriately separate from a focus on gold, Martin de Rada established himself as a protector and defender of the Filipinos. Already aware of the negative impact of the actions of the conquistadors upon the promotion of the gospel, in his letters to Spain, he called to the motives of the conquista and gave advice that it would take time and patience rather than brutality and impatience for the Inyo to understand and accept the new system that was imposed on them. The arrival of the Franciscan order in the Philippines. By the year 1577, the Franciscans arrived in the Philippines. They built hospitals such as San Juan de Dios Hospital and San Lazaro Hospital. The San Lazaro Hospital is known as the first leprosarium in the Far East. The Franciscans also created the first Spanish-Tagalog dictionary or the Vocabulario de Lengua Tagala in 1613. From the time of their arrival in the Philippine archipelago until the end of the Spanish Franciscan mission in 1898, they were able to establish 207 towns or parishes. Fray Diego de Espinar, OSA. Parañaque was officially founded in the year 1580 by the Order of St. Augustine, and it was Fray Diego de Espinar, OSA, who became the first minister of the town. The Council of the Definitors, a conference of chiefs of religious orders, held on June 11, 1580, accepted the village of Parañaque as Parañaque as an independent pueblo. Other towns in the islands simultaneously established the chapter of the Agustinians in Malolos, Bulacan, Cabe, Panay, and Bantayan, Cebu. The image of Parañaque's patroness, Nuestra Señora del Buen Suceso de Parañaque, was brought to St. Andrew's Cathedral in La Huerta on August 10, 1625. Nuestra Señora del Buen Suceso de Parañaque is the third oldest Marian image in the Philippines. The arrival of the Jesuits in the Philippines. In 1581, the Jesuits arrived in the Philippines headed by Father Antonio Sedeño. They stationed in Balayan, Batangas, in Taytay and Antipolo, Rizal. It was Father Pedro Chirino who opened the first school of the Society of Jesus in the Philippines and was a catechetical school for the natives. They set up missions, built parishes, opened mission schools, administered the sacraments, and taught children catechism. They also established several schools like the Ateneo de Manila and College of San Jose. The arrival of the Dominicans. The first Dominicans to arrive in the Philippines was Domingo Salazar, the first Bishop of Manila, and his companion Cristobal de Salvatierra in 1581. It was only in 1587, after the Augustinians, Franciscans, and the Jesuits, that the first batch of religious composed of 15 men arrived at the port of Cavite and established the province of the Most Holy Rosary of the Philippines. After their arrival, 4 were immediately sent to Bataan and 6 to Pangasinan, while the remaining 5 established Santo Domingo in Intramuros. They are credited with founding many of the important towns in these 2 provinces, as well as a few in the present-day province of Tarlac. In Manila, they took charge in the evangelization of the Chinese at the Parian and made the country their base for missionary work in the rest of Asia. One such missionary trip in Japan during the first half of the 17th century saw the martyrdom, among others, of the Filipino-Chinese Lorenzo Ruiz, our first Filipino saint. The arrival of the first Recollect missionaries in the Philippines. The first group of 13 Augustinian Recollect volunteer missionaries from various convents in Spain reached Cebu on May 12, 1606. They proceeded north of the archipelago and arrived at the colonial capital of Manila on May 31. There, they established their first convent at Bagumbayan in the outskirts of the walled city, and soon after their mother housed San Nicolas Church in Intramuros. The acceptance of the Philippine missions strengthened the apostolic character and missionary dimension of the multifaceted charism of the newly born Augustinian Recollection. Such missionary apostolate would save centuries later, in 1835, the Recollection itself, by exempting Monteagudo Convent, which continually trained Spanish missionaries for the Philippine colony, from extinction, and against the onslaught of the Spanish liberal government. Fray Juan de Medina, OSA. Fray Juan de Medina, OSA, was born at Sevilla and entered the Augustinian convent of that city. On reaching the Philippines, he was assigned to the Visayan group and was known to those natives by the name of the Apostle of Panay. A zealous worker, he was known on feast days to preach to his flock in 3 languages: Visayan, Chinese, and Spanish. He was minister at Laglag in 1613, at Mambusao in 1615, at Dumangas in 1618, at Panay in 1619, and at Pasig in 1623, prior of the convent at the Cebu in 1626, and the Venitor in 1629. After 20 years of missionary labors, being soul-tormented, he asked and secured reluctant permission to return to Spain. But the exigencies of the weather prevented the ship from making its voyage. 3 years later, he obtained permission to make some voyage, but died at sea in 1635. Diaz, in his Conquistas, says that Medina composed many things in aid of his missionary work, but only the present history and 4 volumes of manuscript sermons in the Panayana language are known with certainty. Father Manuel Blanco, OSA. A native of Navianos, Zamora in Spain, Father Manuel Blanco, OSA, found his calling as an Augustinian at the age of 16 and departed for the Philippines as a missionary in 1804. He was assigned to Angat, Bulacan, where he mastered Tagalog and found his early love of Philippine flora. His motivation was to discover natural remedies for his parishioners. In 1812, he was promoted as pastor of San Jose, Batangas, whose church building he erected. Successively, he was assigned to Bawan, Batangas, and Parañaque. At age 46, he was elected Councilor of the Augustinian Province and Prior of the Augustinian Monastery in Intramuros. He then became the Rector Provincial of the Augustinians, enabling him to visit their sites from the Ilocos to the Visayas. He largely taught himself in the botanical sciences, including the Swedish Carl Linnaeus, who systematized the identification and naming of plants. The first edition of Flora de Filipinas was printed in 1837 by Imprenta de Santo Tomas and consisted of 887 pages with descriptions of 903 species and varieties of plants in Latin, with 31 in native names.